Can I believe you when you say you killed your mother?
Yes, I did do it. I mean, I don't know positively I did, but I'm pretty sure I did.
How many murders have you confessed to?
Over 3,000.
3,000?
Yeah, over 3,000.
You spent a lot of time confessing.
2.5 years.
It started in a place where nothing like this was supposed to happen. A quiet stretch of the Florida Panhandle, small houses and empty roads, a kind of town where everyone knows each other and nothing ever really changes. Until suddenly, it did. In just a few months, ordinary people were found dead inside their own homes. No warning. No clear reason, no suspect. It felt random. Almost like someone was hunting without a pattern. At first, it looked like isolated crimes, tragic, but unrelated. But what if they weren't? What if, while investigators were chasing separate killers, something far more disturbing was unfolding right in front of them, something they never even considered? Because years later, a man would step forward and claim responsibility not just for those murders, but for dozens more across the country. And buried inside his confessions was one chilling possibility, that one of the most infamous child murders in American history might have been connected to it all. Or worse, that the man confessing to everything might have been lying about the one crime that mattered most. The town itself didn't seem like the kind of place where fear could take root. Tucked along the Florida Panhandle near Interstate 10, places like Bonifay and nearby Chipley moved at a slower pace. Front porches stayed lit at night. Doors weren't always locked. People waved as they drove past each other because chances are they knew exactly who was behind the wheel. Nothing about it suggested danger. That's why the first murder felt so unreal. An 18-year-old girl, young, ordinary, just coming home with groceries, walked into her house and never walked back out. Whoever was inside had been waiting. There was no struggle, no warning, just sudden, brutal violence. The town tried to make sense of it. Maybe it was personal. Maybe there was a reason. But then, it happened again. Just weeks later, another woman, this time a wife and mother, was found dead inside her own bathroom. Different home. Same kind of shock. Same lack of answers. And before anyone could process that, a third victim was killed not far away. Shot through her own door. No confrontation. No explanation. 3 murders. 3 months. No connection anyone could see. That's when the fear really set in, because this didn't feel targeted anymore, it felt random. People started locking their doors, watching unfamiliar cars, questioning strangers. The kind of quiet confidence that once defined the town was gone, replaced by something colder, something uncertain. It was as if a wave of violence had rolled in out of nowhere, and even more disturbing. Just as quickly as it began, it stopped. But that silence didn't bring comfort, because whatever had passed through that town hadn't been caught. Then the violence stopped feeling distant. It became personal. Just miles away, along Interstate 10, a call came in about a robbery at a small gas station near Marianna. Early morning, confusing reports, possibly a suspect still inside. Sheriff John McDaniel responded like he always did, calm, focused, expecting another routine call. But the moment he arrived, something felt off. One of his officers approached him, and the look on his face said everything, no words at first, just shock. Then he said it. "We've got one down." McDaniel kept moving toward the building, not yet understanding what he was about to see. The door was partially open. He could see a pair of legs on the floor, then a body, then a face. And in an instant, everything changed. It was his father, beaten, shot, left there inside the store like it meant nothing. In that moment, the case stopped being just another investigation. It became something else entirely, something heavier, something that wouldn't let go. For years, there were no answers, no arrests, no clear suspects. Just a brutal crime scene and a family left trying to understand why. The sheriff kept working, kept pushing, but the trail had gone cold. Until nearly a decade later, when a call came in from another department. A man in custody had started talking, and what he was saying would reopen everything. What investigators didn't realize at the time was that the violence wasn't staying in one place. It was moving. Across Florida, cases were piling up. Different cities, different victims, different methods, and no one was connecting them. In Jacksonville, detectives were already overwhelmed 8 unsolved murders over the span of just a few years. Young women attacked in their homes, some abducted, some found much later, their remains barely leaving behind any evidence at all. Each case felt isolated, tragic but separate. And that was the problem, because beyond Florida, it got even worse. In Louisiana, a woman was found strangled. In Oklahoma, another victim was stabbed dozens of times. In Illinois, a child was taken at gunpoint. Different states, different crime scenes, no shared suspect, no clear motive. To law enforcement, it looked like a coincidence. Just a series of unrelated horrors happening across the country. But step back, and the pattern starts to feel different. The randomness, the lack of connection, the complete absence of evidence. It didn't look organized. It looked chaotic. And that's exactly why no one considered the possibility that would later shake everything. That these crimes might not only be connected, but carried out by not one, but 2 killers working together, traveling, drifting, leaving behind a trail of violence that stretched across state lines without anyone realizing it. And just when the country was already on edge, one case would explode into national headlines and change everything. And then a name started surfacing. At first, it didn't sound like much, just another drifter. Another petty criminal sitting in a cell, looking for attention. But the more investigators listened, the more unsettling it became. His name was Ottis Toole. He didn't look like the kind of man you'd expect to be at the center of a nationwide investigation. He was quiet, strange, almost disconnected. But beneath that, there was something deeply disturbing. He grew up in Jacksonville, surrounded by poverty, instability, and neglect. His father walked out early. His mother struggled to raise 5 children. There was no structure, no guidance, just chaos from the beginning. As a child, he was already different. He wandered through graveyards, digging into the dirt, obsessed with death. People who knew him later would say he wasn't just troubled, he was drawn to something darker. School never stuck. He could barely read or write. His IQ was low, his behavior unpredictable. By the time he was a teenager, he was already in trouble with the law, breaking into homes, drifting from place to place, surviving however he could. And then his life took another turn. He met a man named Henry Lee Lucas. Lucas wasn't just another criminal, he had already done the unthinkable. He had taken his own mother's life years earlier, and when the two crossed paths, something clicked. They didn't just become friends, they became partners. They traveled together, lived together, moved from place to place with no real plan, no steady work, no reason to stay anywhere for long. Just 2 men drifting across the country. And according to what they would later claim, leaving something far more dangerous behind them. Because once they were caught, they didn't deny anything. They started talking, and what they said would shock the entire nation. Once they started talking, they didn't stop. Sitting in separate prison cells, Otis Toole and Henry Lee Lucas began confessing to crime after crime murders scattered across states, victims no one had been able to identify, cases that had been sitting cold for years. At first, detectives were skeptical. Anyone can claim something, but then the details started coming. Specifics, scenes, methods, little things that hadn't been released to the public. In one case, Toole described how a victim had been attacked inside her own home, down to where certain objects were placed. In another, Lucas explained how a body had been disposed of, details that seemed impossible to guess. And then came the moment that made everything feel real. The murder of Sheriff John McDaniel's father. Toole didn't just confess. He described the scene with chilling accuracy. The weapon, the positioning, and one detail that had never been made public. The victim was missing part of his arm. When investigators heard that, something shifted, because that wasn't something you could easily make up. Suddenly, the impossible started to feel possible. What if these two men really had done it? What if they weren't exaggerating? The confessions kept growing. 10 victims, then 20, then hundreds. Lucas claimed over 600. Toole said more than 100 of his own. The numbers were unbelievable, but the system at the time leaned heavily on one thing: confession. If someone admitted to a crime and backed it with enough detail, it was often enough to close a case. And that's exactly what started happening. Departments across the country began reaching out. Old files were reopened. Detectives lined up to speak with them, hoping to finally solve cases that had haunted them for years. For a moment, it felt like answers were finally coming, like justice was being delivered. But buried beneath all those confessions was a problem no one wanted to face. The stories were getting bigger, more dramatic, more impossible, and the most shocking claim of all was still coming. Then came the confession that changed everything. Not just another case, not just another victim. This one already had a name the entire country knew: Adam Walsh. He was just 6 years old when he vanished from a shopping mall in Hollywood. One moment, he was standing near a video game display. The next, he was gone. It was the kind of disappearance that made no sense. Middle of the day. Busy store. People everywhere. And yet, no one saw anything. His parents, John Walsh and Reve Walsh, were thrown into a nightmare that felt unreal. Calls to the police, desperate searches, flyers everywhere, strangers joining in, hoping for a miracle. But the miracle never came. Days passed, and weeks, until a horrifying discovery was made. His remains were found miles away, leaving behind more questions than answers. The case shook the entire nation. Who could do something like this and disappear without a trace? For years, there was nothing. No suspect strong enough. No evidence that could hold. Just silence. Until, sitting in a prison cell, Otis Toole suddenly claimed responsibility, and what he described was almost too disturbing to process. He said he approached the boy casually, gained his trust, let him out without causing a scene, then forced him into his car and drove away. At some point, the child started crying. That's when, according to Toole, things turned violent. He described what happened next in a way that left even seasoned investigators shaking details about the attack, the weapon, and how he disposed of the remains. Some of it matched too closely. He even identified the exact location connected to the case, something detectives hadn't made public. For a moment, it seemed like the mystery might finally be over, like the man responsible had finally been found. But then the cracks started to show, because the more they listened to him, the less certain everything became. At first, the confession felt convincing, but the deeper investigators looked, the more it started to fall apart. Ottis Toole couldn't keep his story straight. Details shifted. Timelines changed. One version contradicted the next. What once sounded precise now felt unstable. And came the bigger problem. Some of the crimes he and Henry Lee Lucas had confessed to were impossible. Records began to surface, payroll logs, receipts, even witness statements placing them in completely different states at the exact times they claimed to be committing murders. In one case, they were supposedly killing victims out west, while documented proof showed them working jobs back in Florida. It didn't just raise doubts, it shattered credibility. And investigative reporter dug deeper, lining up dates, locations, and evidence, and what he uncovered changed everything. Case after case began to unravel. Confessions that once closed investigations were suddenly reopened. Police departments realized something uncomfortable. They might have been solving crimes with lies. Even in the Adam Walsh case, the issues were impossible to ignore. Toole's confession came shortly after a televised movie about the case aired. A movie that included key details. He later repeated almost word for word. And then there was Henry Lee Lucas. Toole originally claimed Lucas was with him during the abduction, but that couldn't be true. Lucas was in jail at the time. When confronted, Toole changed his story again. Now he said he acted alone. Then later, he backed away from the confession entirely. And it didn't stop there. He would confess, then recant. Confess again, then deny it. Over and over. It became a pattern. Investigators started hearing from inmates who said Toole enjoyed the game, giving just enough information to seem believable, then pulling it back and watching the chaos unfold. And suddenly, a disturbing question emerged. Was he telling the truth about any of it? Or had he figured out exactly how to manipulate the system? Because if his confessions couldn't be trusted, then every solved case, every closed file was back in question. As the confessions unraveled, so did the illusion that hundreds of cases had finally been solved. What investigators were left with wasn't clarity but confusion on a massive scale. Ottis Toole had already been tied to multiple convictions, including a handful of murders he ultimately pleaded guilty to. But beyond that small confirmed number, everything else started to blur. Claims of dozens, then hundreds of victims began collapsing under basic verification. And the same pattern appeared with Henry Lucas. Entire cases he solved through confession were later proven to be physically impossible. Locations didn't match. Dates didn't line up. Evidence placed him miles away or in custody at the time of the crimes. What once looked like a breakthrough in law enforcement started to look like something else entirely. A system that had leaned too heavily on confession instead of proof. In case after case, investigators admitted something uncomfortable. They had stopped digging once they heard the words, "I did it," because at the time, a detailed confession carried enormous weight, sometimes more than physical evidence itself. And that created a dangerous opening. Because Toole and Lucas didn't just confess, they performed. They fed investigators exactly what they wanted to hear, stories filled with detail, violence, and emotion enough to close files that had been open for years. But when reporters and cold case teams began rechecking the facts, the foundation cracked. Some victims they claimed were confirmed never existed in the records. Others were alive during the supposed time of death. Entire narratives fell apart under basic verification, and slowly, a different truth emerged. Not every confession was a solution. Some were distractions. Even the most infamous case of all, the murder of Adam Walsh, could not be firmly tied to either man. Despite intense scrutiny, changing statements, and years of investigation, there was still no physical evidence placing Ottis Toole at the scene. No weapon. No definitive forensic link. No one contested proof. Just words shifting over time. And so, many of the cases tied to them were quietly pulled back from closure and returned to cold case files. For some families, that meant relief. They learned the truth was more complicated than they were told. For others, it meant something worse, the certainty they once it was gone. And in its place was a new, more disturbing question. How many cases were truly solved, and how many were only solved because someone wanted to believe they were? In the end, the story didn't close the way anyone expected. One by one, the massive confessions that once shook the country were stripped back. Cases that had been solved were reopened. Names that had been attached to dozens, sometimes hundreds of murders were removed from file after file. Henry Lee Lucas and Ottis Toole were no longer seen as the key to hundreds of mysteries across the United States. Most of those claims simply didn't hold up under scrutiny. But that didn't mean everything they said was false. Both men were still connected to real, confirmed crimes. In Toole's case, he ultimately pleaded guilty to several murders and received multiple life sentences. There was real violence there, real victims, real consequences. Yet the scale they once claimed, the nationwide trail of horror, slowly collapsed under investigation. And in the middle of all that confusion, one case never fully settled: the disappearance and murder of Adam Walsh. Despite years of investigation, shifting confessions, and intense public pressure, no physical evidence ever definitively confirmed who was responsible. John Walsh was left without the one thing he had been searching for since that day in the mall: absolute certainty. And the failures didn't end with the suspects. Files were lost. Evidence was misplaced. A vehicle tied to the investigation was eventually sold off and disappeared. Items that might have helped modern forensic testing, especially DNA analysis, were gone long before the technology even existed. Looking back, investigators admitted something uncomfortable. The case had been handled in a different era, with different standards, and critical mistakes were made along the way. But the deeper issue wasn't just what was lost, it was what had been believed. Because for years, law enforcement across the country relied heavily on confessions, especially ones that sounded detailed and emotionally convincing. And men like Toole and Lucas knew exactly how to exploit that. They gave investigators stories that felt like answers. They filled in blanks that cold cases had left open for years. And in doing so, they became something far bigger than they actually were. Not master criminals, but unreliable narrators in cases that desperately needed closure. When journalists finally pieced together the timelines, the contradictions became impossible to ignore. Employment records placed them in different states during alleged murders. Witnesses and documents clashed with their claims. Some of their most dramatic confessions simply couldn't have happened. The truth slowly shifted into focus. They had not solved hundreds of murders, but they had confused hundreds of investigations. And in that confusion, real answers may have been buried even deeper. Today, most of the cases tied to their confessions remain cold or reclassified. Only a fraction were ever confirmed. The rest exist in a strange space between myth, memory, and missing evidence. As for the murder of Adam Walsh, it remains one of the most painful and enduring mysteries in modern American crime history. A case that changed laws, shaped investigations, and forever impacted the people involved, but still never received a definitive resolution in court. So what's left at the end of it all isn't just a story about killers or confessions. It's a story about certainty that turned out to be fragile. About how easily chaos can look like clarity when everyone is desperate for answers. And about how sometimes the most dangerous thing in an investigation isn't silence. It's someone willing to say exactly what you want to hear. In the end, the story of Otis Toole and Henry Lucas isn't just about crimes. It's about certainty that slowly fell apart. What started as one of the most shocking breakthroughs in criminal history ended as something far more unsettling, a reminder that even in the justice system, answers can be built on unstable ground. Some of their confessions were tied to real victims, real pain, real loss that can never be undone. But beyond that small number, the larger story they told hundreds of murders across the country collapsed under evidence, timelines, and basic fact-checking. And yet, one case still lingers in the background of everything: the disappearance and murder of Adam Walsh. Despite decades of investigation, shifting statements, and multiple claims from Toole, there was never enough physical evidence to fully close the case in a courtroom. No definitive proof. No uncontested final answer. Just fragments, some convincing, some contradictory, all incomplete. That's what makes this story so disturbing. Not just the violence, but the uncertainty that remains long after the headlines faded. Because it forces a difficult question. How many solved cases were truly solved? And how many were simply accepted because the truth was too difficult to keep searching for? And somewhere inside that uncertainty is the most uncomfortable realization of all. Sometimes the system doesn't fail because nothing is known. It fails because it thinks it knows too soon.